Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, Joe Cucchiara, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, Joe Cucchiara.
Welcome in, Joe Cucchiara with Real Estate Radio Live. I hope everyone is doing well in this crazy time. We are live on Facebook, and I hope it's working. It certainly looks like it's working, but it's amazing what this change in events have done to all of us. It is really crazy. I know you may have heard this before. I have Jack Russo with me, but we were doing this in a studio for the last several years, and I was all excited and impressed that I had the studio with all this equipment. And
you have a great studio. Great studio.
And now, here I am at my desktop achieving the same results. And so, here we go, COVID-19 version, right?
No, Joe, I have to say, you inspire me to duplicate a Class B version, not a Class A version, but a Class B version of your studio. In my office, I'm proud of it. It's a low-cost version. You have the sort of chic version, the Class A version. I have the Class B version because I took all your hand-me-down equipment and kind of patched it together. It works. Yeah. It's probably not as good sound quality as what you have in your studio, but it worked, and it worked well. And the truth is we only got off about, 10 or 15 podcasts out of that studio, and then COVID hit. So everyone was like, we're not going into your studio. It's a small, it's actually even smaller than yours in some way. And they were like, that's cozy, but we're not going in there now. And so I'm doing the same thing you're doing, which is you can do this stuff from the convenience of your bedroom table at home.
Yeah, it's good. What this does in many ways, just like everything else, you're faced with adversity and you figure out how you kind of shift gears and move along. So
adaptability is the most important human instinct, and it's probably the only thing that's going to save the species if we're lucky enough to be saved. There are some people, including, I think, Elon Musk. We were talking about him in some of the other shows, but, he's announced that he's going to basically sell, maybe he's already sold, like $100 million of California real estate, like 5-6 residences. Yeah. They're not small properties. And I think he's selling them lock, stock, and barrel with, I was almost going to say with all of his ex-wives and girlfriends, but it's just a joke, Elon. All the personal property as well, like the piano and the kitchen sink, everything, all of the fixtures and the non-fixtures. And that's a big statement that effectively he's getting out of Dodge fast. Right. And I think that's a signal that lots of rich people, because that guy is a billionaire with a B, maybe a 10-fold, maybe actually even 100-fold billionaire. He's not as rich as Bezos yet, but he's up there. And once he leaves California, that's 13.3% of whatever income comes from all of those assets going out the door. I mean,
for him,
a big number, right?
Yeah, I mean, for him, it's not going to affect his life. But I think the message here is that on a large scale, we talked about it last week, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the future of real estate investing. But this is kind of pieced together, and that we'll be talking about the last several weeks is that you have large companies, big name people that are leaving the state of California. And we've talked before. I think the thought was been Silicon Valley is, has this coat of armor that can't be chipped away at. But I think it's being chipped away at right now. Whether it's going to be solid enough to withstand the kind of the chipping and the nagging and the tipping is another story. But Elon's kind of a big number. We talked about some of the new potential tax issues that are faced with Proposition 13. And then I think you call it, isn't the headcount tax they're trying to do too?
They're imposing for commercial buildings that have 50 or more employees and some sort of additional tax. And I think the tax situation is really being generated in part by the loss of rich people.
Yeah.
So, I remember hearing this like 20 years ago. And I remember saying to the people that were saying it, no, you're wrong. And that was back when California taxes were maybe like 10%. And they were like, California taxes are going to go up to at least 15%. They may have been a little bit over aggressive on that. But they were right that they were going up. They might have even been 9% at the time, because they said, oh, it's going to be way more than 10, and it's eventually going to be 15. And now people are talking like it's definitely getting to 15 and it'll go to 20. And, there is a point where you hit the teeter-totter and you just tilt over. And people, they start to look at that quarterly tax payment if they're filing or submitting quarterly estimates. And they start saying, I'm working a lot of this quarter to pay taxes that I wouldn't have to pay. I could be in front of the same screen anywhere.
Yeah.
I could be in front of the same screen in Texas. I could be in the front of the same screen in Nevada. State of Washington, all non-tax states.
I would encourage people to go through this exercise, because I've done it, and Jack, you've probably done it not knowing it, but one of the things I want to say on the podcast today, I think it's a very valuable exercise. I've gone through it myself the last couple of weeks on purpose. As you're talking to people, whether they're business, personal, clients, whatever, just casually ask them, what do you think what's going on in terms of California, business, life? And I can tell you that this is, of course, a very informal survey and research, right? But let's face it, if each of you talk to maybe 15 to 20, 25% of people and it's going to tell you the truth, I could tell you 60 to 70% of people are very concerned, talking about it, having major conversations about it. I can tell you my math is 20 to 30% are seriously talking about leaving. Whether they will or not is another story, but I can't think of another time in my lifetime. I've been in the Bay Area for 45 years. I can't think of another time in my life in the Bay Area that I've had that percentage of people either A, concerned, or B, really having that conversation. What do you think, Jack?
I think that's accurate, and I would say keep in mind that if you own real estate that is non-residential real estate, that's income real estate, the federal side and California too, and it gets a little complicated, allow you to use Internal Revenue Code 1031 to take the gain and move it to what's called a like-kind property, which means another investment property. So it's not hard. Let's say you have an apartment building in California and you're starting to think, I want to get out of California.
Right.
Well, you got to move the things you can move out of California first. Well, investors are pretty savvy and they're always looking around the United States. In fact, lots of them have scouts looking around gentrifying neighborhoods in other states. So we know, for example, big thing that was announced about a week or two ago, maybe a little longer, it's hard to keep track of time, is there's going to be a new factory outside of Austin for Tesla. That factory could have been built in California. He made a conscious decision, or it could have been built in Reno. He made a conscious decision that he wanted Austin engineers. He wants talent from Dell, from a lot of Austin companies. He thinks those companies are going to wither away. He wants
I think Apple's there too, right?
Sorry?
I think Apple's got a big
Apple's
presence
there.
in Austin.
There's a lot of big companies in Austin. In fact, there's a direct flight. I've had cases in Austin. I'm admitted in the federal court in Austin, in Texas. There's a direct flight called the Nerd Bird, Nerdbird, on Southwest. It's actually pretty cheap if you get it in advance. You could get a flight on the Nerd Bird. It's like 6 a.m, going directly to Austin, no stops. Southwest Airlines. I want to say it's like a 3 hour and 15-minute flight, like that. So there's a time zone change, but basically you get there in time to have meetings and get a day's worth of work done, and then you could get a flight back. Maybe you spend the night. I mean, Austin's actually a nice town. It has a very Silicon Valley flavor to it. But if you're thinking about getting out of California with your life, you start moving that investment property out of California. As you start moving that investment property out of California, you start thinking to yourself, why am I here? Why am I in California? My investment property is located outside California. So it starts to become like a trickle-down effect of you're moving more things out. And then, of course, your kids start to say, well, where are you going? You say, well, I got most of my investments in Texas, let's say, or Nevada. I can be behind a computer anywhere. So why do I have to pay 13.3%? Now, some people say you pay 13.3% because basically that's the weather. That's the price of the weather. The weather is better than Texas. The weather is better than Nevada. I know people who say, I think California weather stinks. a certain period of the year. I personally don't like the rain that's here. I would leave here in a nanosecond. I mean, I used to be a big skier. To some degree, I still am, but I find it difficult to get up to Tahoe. Often there's too many crowded people on the road. I used to leave like on a Friday night. You have to leave at like 2 a.m. to avoid the traffic if it's a snow day to Tahoe. So there's a lot of congestion here. There's a lot of expense. There's a lot of taxes. We love California because we love the people, but you're not able to meet the people except behind the screen. So what's the point?
I was golfing yesterday with a guy who has pretty successful at several different companies, and we were talking about this very same subject. And it was interesting. His case was, we talked about this. He's staying in California, and here's one of the things he said I haven't heard yet, but I thought it was pretty interesting. He says the thing that a lot of people have to remember is that most of us are overpaid in California. We have to keep that in mind too.
Well, there are people that believe that, and there are people that say the only real reason for staying in California is you have work here.
Yeah.
If you don't have work here, you shouldn't be here. You're either rich or you have work here, and the rich are going. So if we're right that the rich are going, and just a few minutes ago, Facebook said it's going to have a remote policy at least through the summer of 2021. That's a year from now. Why, if you work for Facebook and you're making the big bucks for Facebook and there's a remote policy, why would you live in California?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you go to Nevada? Why wouldn't you instantly say, I'm going to buy in Reno? So we should see, if you're taking this logic to its logical conclusion, as we see more companies in California issue remote policies, more of those workers saying, I need to save as much money as possible to even come back to live in California. Mm-hmm. I can save on a $200,000 joint paycheck for me and the spouse, maybe something like an additional $30,000 a year.
A lot of money.
Avoid what is really going to become a 15% tax. That's a down payment on a house. That's a potential down payment. Maybe the house in Reno, not a house in California yet. You got to accumulate that. But maybe you get to say to Facebook, I'm going to stay for a while. So then it becomes like a vicious cycle, because then the price of real estate starts climbing in Reno. We should see that. We should see the price in Austin start climbing. All of these tax advantage places, Seattle, anywhere in Washington State is basically a zero tax. Tennessee is a zero tax. Right? Yeah. There's a number of states, Delaware, although Delaware is cold. So, you have to deal with the climate as well. So there's a number of factors, and there are a number of newsletters you can read that try to track what's going on nationally. And of course, those jurisdictions have not traditionally had the same appreciation California has had. Mm-hmm. California's had an immense appreciation. The fact that you can buy a house, like the first house I bought at a law school, I think it went up on average 15% a year over the period that I held it. I mean, who makes 15% a year on a consistent basis? So there's a lot of value to be in California, but there are more and more, and particularly as people get older, they start to wonder. And we had that story of Steve King leaving for Arizona, and Arizona has taxes, so it wasn't totally tax driven for him.
So here's my other take to it on the long term, but I don't know, long term is an interesting thing when you're almost 60 years old. I have to start talking about long term. Is that
you still like you're in your 40s, man? You're still looking good.
I think that first of all, I don't know in the next couple of years anyway, I can't see personally that. But what I could see is, and what I would say right now, my suggestion, my thoughts, and even personally what I'd say is, if I decided to either relocate or do something else, I personally would always leave at least one piece of property here. And I would not sell everything because, let's just take a kind of a crazy futuristic view here. So what if this place comes crumbling down, California, and you get a huge population that leaves, Silicon Valley becomes a semi-ghost town, and all these just say the craziest thing, right?
Okay.
And property prices come tumbling down 30, 40, 50%. The thing that you can't change is the geographic, the weather, a lot of places around this area of California, the beaches, I could go on and on. You could argue then it becomes this great buying market. Right?
Okay, so you want a foothold. I thought you were going a different way with that. I thought where you were headed was, hey, look, the assessed value rules where it's just the assessed value of when you purchased it that's probably not going to change for residential property. They're talking about changing that for commercial property with a 3-year reassessment every 3 years.
Right.
But on residential, a lot of people are grandfathered. Like my next door neighbor has had his house. I've had my house in Portola Valley for going on 30 years.
Wow.
Like literally. It'll be 30 years next year.
Boy.
He's had his place for 60 years.
Boy.
I asked him, what does he pay in real estate tax? He said something like $140 a year. Place is worth like $14 million.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got a beautiful property. It's gone up in value. Those kids, his kids, can inherit that property with that property tax assessment basis. And that low, it's almost like they're grandfathered in. So if you have a decent house that you like where it is, you like the view, you like this, you like that, it's like a long-term bank account that's not going to get attacked if you say California is not going to do nutty things.
Right.
So if they don't reassess it, if they don't say, well, now you're making money on that property, so it's no longer a residence, if they don't do that to you. But I want to drop a footnote. If you leave property in California, you leave a trail for the franchise tax board to question whether you've really left. So they're going to look at things like, did you give up your driver's license? Did you give up your motorcycle's license? Did you give up your voter registration card? Did you retitle those all? Is your church changed? Is your barber changed? Is your dentist changed? Is your priest changed? Like they're going to look at all the hooks. And if you have a property, particularly if you're coming back to the property to occasionally be in it, they're going to say, well, wait a minute, maybe you really haven't left. And then you're going to be in a fight that could last even 5 or more years, in which they assess whether you're coming back too much. Because then the question becomes, do you have to pay taxes in both places?
Right.
Particularly if you've gone to Arizona where you are paying taxes. At least if you go to Texas, it's zero taxes. Now there's a high sales tax in Texas. There's high real estate taxes in Texas. So maybe it balances out, maybe it doesn't. But I do think it is something we have to imagine, that if people are no longer actually physically meeting, what happens to California as the place to be? Because clearly being here and physically meeting smart people and having fun with them is a real lifestyle benefit and perhaps is worth paying the tax. But when you're behind a screen in Zoom, you could be behind a screen in Zoom in Puerto Rico.
That's right. You
could be behind a screen in Zoom anywhere. And there are people that are perpetual travelers that are behind the screen nowhere and everywhere. They're basically plugged in. And if the glasses come out, as they say they are, you're behind the screen 7x24 because you got your glasses on. And your glasses become your video screens.
Here's another idea I have for those before we kind of wrap things up. Over the last couple of years, the state and counties have really been, for the first time in many years, advocating and encouraging and making it more possible to build ADUs on your property. So for those that don't know, accessory dwelling units. So those used to be really difficult to get in the past. Right now, they're not. Matter of fact, the city's working with you. There's 2 reasons. 1, they want to try to help the housing challenge. 2, they're going to collect tax revenue for them. So here's another thing I think it's a great idea for people to think of and consider. If you have a property, by the way, it doesn't take much square footage on the property. If you have a property, seriously, I would build an ADU on it, 1 or 2, as many as you could affordably in the next couple of years while they're allowing it and while they're issuing permits. And so you're going to do a couple things. 1, you're going to increase the value of your property because you're adding legal square footage. 2, imagine a time when maybe you're going to travel the world or live in many places and you yourself occupy that ADU and you rent your primary property out.
That's what some of my friends are doing, but they're doing it in even more, what we might call even more aggressive way. They're buying Airstream trailers, not an ADU. They're parking them on the vacant space. Let's call it the back of the driveway.
Interesting.
And they're moving into those trailers and saying to whoever wants to rent, we're not going to bother you. We're going to be in our trailer. And by the way, we're going to take our trailer and drive it to, a camping site too. It's not a permanent thing. They're doing exactly what you're doing, because the other benefit is they actually are still able to say they're residents is on that property. So if they want to take that 500,000 couple tax-free Section 121 gain privilege, they still can while they collect rent. And they could theoretically even couple 1031 for that portion of the property that's now become a non-residential income property.
I like it.
It gives you some slicing and dicing that most people don't have kind of sophisticated tax knowledge on,
Right.
and they don't get the legal up. I mean, I have clients that walk in all the time. I want to do this, I want to do that. And I say, well, have you considered if you do it this way, you might save, someone I just got off the phone with that delayed us a bit. I said, you might save $20 million in taxes if you do it this way. I swear the guy was like, when can we meet? Where can we meet? How do we? Oh, I know you're not supposed to meet, but let's figure out a way to meet, because the point is there's a lot of angles out there that you only get if you talk to someone who's completely neutral and not absorbed by all of your personal complications.
And
who can
political.
look through it. Who can look through it and say, look, if you do it this way, and that way, then you get this better result.
Right.
Are you interested? Let's talk further. So that's where you get some real advice from talking to someone like me that's been around long enough to have collected all this nuggets of wisdom, 40 years.
There you go. So that's a lesson to everybody as we kind of wrap things up today. If you have any legal questions in terms of anything, as always, check in with Jack and the team, because it's very true. It's easy to get caught up in, what your family or neighbors or friends are saying, but get some advice of people that have been around this for a long time, whether it's personal, primarily here business we're talking about. But then before you make some of those emotional decisions, and for the moment, try to leave the political stuff aside as well.
We'll spend the whole show on that, I'm sure. Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Real quick before we go, remind everybody where they could reach you, Jack.
Right. Jack Russo, www.computerlaw.com. J Russo, JRUSSO at Computer Law, LAW, COMPUTERLAW.com, 650-327-9800. We're up and down Silicon Valley now. We have offices in San Francisco, Palo Alto, and San Jose, but of course they're all sheltering in place. So we have phone numbers associated with each as well, but most people use email these days, and that's fine.
So back in the day, you had the vision, something just came to mind. You had the vision years ago to think about the computer law, right? Law group, computer part of technology, part of Silicon Valley, which was in its infancy back then.
Right.
So now if you were starting, would it be virtual law? What would it be?
Well, we did actually adopt a second brand that we use, although we use it kind of in unique ways, called Entrepreneur Law.
Oh, okay.
An Entrepreneur Law Group. And we have a website at entrepreneur.law. But think of it as Entrepreneur Law is really the broader version of computer law, because it's always entrepreneurs that are doing stuff with computers. I mean, there are still a few entrepreneurs that are trying to figure out, what's the form of a better cup kind of thing.
Right.
But most entrepreneurs are doing something with digital equipment in some form, whether it's video, audio, text, whatever it is. So we see a lot of entrepreneurs, and we do help them figure out which path to take. And they often, even just after meeting us for a couple of hours, they're like, wow, I got some insights here that really I can run with. So we welcome that, because we think we add a lot of value to the way in which entrepreneurs think about their innovations.
No, you do for sure. Well, good having you, Jack. We'll see you. Hopefully we can do something next week.
Great. That'd be great. And maybe the thing to do is invite you out to Stanford Golf Course, and we can hit some golf balls and then have some lunch, figure out how to do that. That's a nice outdoor activity.
You got some connections in Stanford, right?
I'll figure out a way to do that and get us on the course, okay?
All right, Jack.
Thanks,
Take
Joe.
care.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Take care of yourself. Joe Cucchiara, Real Estate Radio Live. Checking in with Jack Russo, always a good time. For more information, you can go to RERL-1731-The. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit RERadiolive.com. That's RERadiolive.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at RERadiolive.com.